His feet stopped before his mind understood why. Around him, the autumn festival carried on as if nothing had happened. Music still playing, people still laughing, the smell of roasted corn still drifting through the breeze. But Reed Ashford couldn't hear any of it anymore. Everything around him blurred into nothing, except for one thing, sharp, undeniable. Down in the corner of the painting the little girl had just finished. A sparrow, small, simple, just a few loose strokes, but unmistakable. Because 10 years ago, the only woman who ever made Reed, a man who held an entire empire in his hands, lose sleep at night, always signed her work with that exact sparrow. And that woman had vanished from his life without a single word. Until tonight. If this story touched you, hit like so more people can hear it. Share this video with someone who needs a warm story today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next one. Reed moved through the crowd, his shoulder cutting through laughter and the smell of street food without his even noticing. His eyes were fixed in only one direction. The little girl was sitting on a low plastic stool, and in front of her stood an old wooden easel, the cheap kind sold in school supply stores. Her hand held a brush as she finished a portrait of a middle-aged woman who was standing there watching. The stroke of the brush slanted, light, drawn from left to right with a habit Reed recognized at once. Not because it was beautiful, but because it was too familiar. He stopped a few steps away from the girl. Around them, the crowd was still murmuring in admiration, and someone gave a soft round of applause when she placed the final stroke. The woman in the portrait smiled broadly, pulled out her wallet, and placed a few coins into the small box beside the easel. The girl nodded in thanks, then tore the sheet free and handed the portrait to the woman. Reed waited until the woman had gone. Then he stepped forward. "Who taught you to draw this bird?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was something in the question that made the girl lift her head and look at him. Her eyes were round, bright, neither afraid nor curious, only direct. "My mother," the girl said. Reed swallowed lightly. "What is your mother's name?" The girl tilted her head slightly, looking at him as though she were weighing whether she should answer. Then she replied simply, "Joanna." That name passed through Reed like an electric current. He didn't move. His expression didn't change. But inside him, everything had just shifted. "When is your mother's birthday?" Reed asked again, his voice softer now, as if he were afraid of the answer. The girl looked at him for another second. "March 15th. Reed stood still. Completely still. Around him, the music was still playing, the crowd was still moving, but he wasn't there anymore. He was in a small apartment 10 years earlier, where a woman had smiled and said, "Remember this day, no matter what happens." March 15th, that day, the exact same day. The voice of the MC rang out from the small stage in the middle of the square, pulling Reed back to the present. The portrait contest was moving into the judging round. The girl stood up, neatly arranged her brushes inside the box, and waited. And when her name was called, Tessa Mercer, she stepped forward to receive the prize. A handmade wool scarf, cream-colored, folded carefully inside thin wrapping paper. Tessa accepted the scarf with both hands. She didn't beam with delight. She didn't jump up in excitement. She only nodded, then held the scarf against her chest as though she were protecting something important. Reed watched her step down and walk straight back toward her box of drawing supplies. He followed. "That scarf," he said. "Is it for you?" Tessa shook her head without looking up, her hands folding the scarf once more into a neater square. "It's for my mother. My mother's birthday is coming soon." Reed looked at the girl. 9 years old, maybe 10, sitting in the middle of a crowded festival, drawing portraits of strangers to win a wool scarf for her mother. He drew in a slow breath. "Can you let me meet your mother?" Tessa looked up this time. She looked straight at him without blinking. "My mother told me not to go with strangers." The answer came quickly, neatly, without the slightest hesitation. Reed nodded. He didn't press. He didn't ask another question. Instead, he took a small business card from the pocket of his suit jacket, turned it over, and quickly wrote a phone number on the back with a ballpoint pen. Then he handed it to her. "Tell your mother that someone knows about the Sparrow," he said. "If your mother wants to meet, call me." Tessa looked at the business card. Then she looked at him. The girl didn't ask why. She didn't ask who he was. She only took the card, slipped it into the pocket of her coat, then lifted her box of drawing supplies and stood. "Goodbye," the girl said. Then she turned away, the neatly folded wool scarf in her hand, and disappeared into the thinning stream of people as the festival began to wind down. Reed remained where he was, He watched after her until that small figure vanished completely around the corner of the street. Then he turned, walking toward the black car parked 2 blocks away. Pierce was waiting, and tonight, Reed knew, was going to be very long. Reed sat in the back seat, the car door shut tight, the festival lights already fading far behind in the rearview mirror. Pierce sat in the driver's seat, both hands resting on the steering wheel, silent. He didn't ask. He never asked when Reed wore that expression. The phone lay on Reed's lap. The screen was dark. He looked at it the way a man might look at a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. Then it vibrated. Unknown number. Reed picked it up, raised it to his ear, but didn't speak first. The other end of the line was silent too. There was only breathing. Light, uneven, like someone trying to keep her voice from breaking. Then a woman's voice rose, so quiet that Reed had to tilt his head closer to hear it. "Who are you?" 3 words, but Reed heard more than 3 words. He heard 10 years compressed into a single question asked by someone who already knew the answer. He closed his eyes for 1 second. "You know who I am, Joanna." Silence. Longer than before. Heavier than before. Reed heard something from the other end, and he couldn't tell whether it was a breath or the sound of someone swallowing. But it carried something he had never heard in Joanna's voice before. Fear. Not the weak kind of fear. The kind of fear that belongs to someone who has been running for 10 years, and now knows that the past has just knocked at the door. "Tessa told me," Joanna said, her voice turning hard, like someone who had just made a decision. "About the Sparrow. About the man who asked for my birthday." Reed said nothing. He waited. "Come here." Joanna's voice no longer trembled. Cold. Controlled. Like someone opening the door to an enemy because she knows locking it won't keep him out. "Alone. Tessa isn't home. I sent her to Mrs. Miller's place." She gave him the address. Clearly, slowly, 1 word at a time. Then she hung up. No goodbye. No further question. She simply ended the call. Reed lowered the phone, looked straight ahead. Inside him, everything was shifting, but on the outside, he didn't move. Pierce glanced at him in the rearview mirror. Reed recited the address. Pierce gave a slight nod and started the engine. The car pulled away from the bright part of the city, turning into narrower streets, darker streets, where the streetlights began to thin out, and the sounds of the festival gave way to the sound of the engine moving over rough pavement. Reed didn't look outside. He looked at the phone, at the call that had just ended, at the 3 words unknown number on the screen. For 10 years he had searched for her, hired people, asked everywhere, turned over every clue, and she had erased every trace so completely that even the best men in his network hadn't been able to find her. Now she had called him, on her own. She had set the terms. She had given him an address. And Reed understood one thing with complete clarity. Joanna hadn't called because she wanted to see him. She had called because she knew he would find out another way, and she would rather open the door than let him break it down himself. The car stopped in front of an old apartment building on the south side. The paint was peeling, and the hallway light flickered behind the dirty glass door. Reed opened the car door and stepped out. Then he turned and looked at Pierce. "Wait here." Pierce nodded. Reed walked on, into the darkness. Alone, exactly as Joanna had demanded. The stairwell was narrow, each step creaking beneath his feet. The hallway light flickered, went dark for a beat, then came back on, just enough for Reed to see the cracks running along the walls and the peeling paint that no one had repaired in a very long time. 3rd floor, last door at the end of the hall. Reed stopped. He stood there for 1 second, then 2, and knocked. 2 knocks. Not hard, not soft. Enough for the person inside to know he had arrived. Footsteps sounded from within, slow, heavier than they should have been for a woman of 28. Then the door opened, and Reed saw her. Joanna stood in the doorway, one hand still gripping the doorknob, the other hanging at her side. She was thinner than he remembered. Much thinner. Her collarbones stood out sharply beneath an old t-shirt, her face more hollow at the cheeks, her skin pale under the weak light. But her eyes had not changed. Still those same eyes, sharp, guarded, and angry. Not the kind of anger that erupts, the kind that has been compressed for 10 years, and now lies still behind a gaze like a knife already drawn from its sheath, but not yet swung. She looked him over from head to toe, dark suit, leather shoes, a watch that even 1 month of her salary could never buy. Then she spoke. "Come in." It wasn't an invitation. It was an order. the voice of someone who wanted to end something as quickly as possible. Reed stepped across the threshold. The apartment was small, clean, but bare. The kind of bareness that belongs to someone who keeps only what is truly necessary and throws away everything else. Then he saw it. On the wall opposite the entrance hung a small painting in a simple wooden frame. 2 chairs side by side in a park. No one sitting in them. Yellow leaves scattered across the ground around them. And in the lower right corner, the Sparrow. Reed went still. He remembered that painting. He remembered the afternoon Joanna had sat on the floor, her legs folded beneath her, the canvas resting against her knees, painting while she told him about the 2 chairs in Grant Park that she passed every morning. "The 2 chairs are always there," she had said, "but I never see anyone sitting in them at the same time. It's sad." Then she had smiled and added, "So I painted them, so at least in the painting, they have each other." She finished that painting on her birthday, March 15th, and gave it to him. "You kept it," Reed said, his voice low. It wasn't a question, it was confirmation. Confirmation that after everything, after 10 years of disappearing, after erasing every trace, after running to a cheap apartment on the south side where no one could find her, Joanna had still kept that painting on her wall. Joanna didn't explain. She didn't look at the painting. She didn't look at him looking at the painting. She stood beside the small table, both arms folded across her chest, and asked him directly, "What do you want?" Her voice no longer trembled the way it had on the phone. Now, on her own ground, she had taken back control. Or at least she wanted him to believe that. Reed turned to look at her, and for one moment, he didn't see the bare apartment, didn't see the peeling wall, didn't see the old chair or the pale yellow light. He saw only her, Joanna, after 10 years, real, standing right in front of him, thinner, weaker, but still her. "I want to know if you're all right," he said. Joanna looked at him. Her expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. But she didn't answer that question. Not in this part. Because what she was about to say next would change everything. Joanna didn't answer right away. She stood there, her arms still folded across her chest, looking at him the way someone looks at a person she has prepared herself to see again in her mind 1,000 times, and yet has never truly been ready for. Then she smiled. It wasn't a smile with any warmth in it. It was the kind of smile worn by someone who has just heard something so absurd she doesn't know whether she should be angry or pity the speaker. 10 years, she said. For 10 years you didn't look for me, and now you're standing in my apartment, in the middle of the night, asking if I'm all right. Reed didn't step back. "I did look for you." Joanna lifted one brow, but not in surprise, in disbelief. Reed went on, his voice even, not defensive, not pleading, only laying out the truth. "I went back to the old apartment 3 weeks after you left. The landlord said you had moved out and hadn't left a new address. I asked the people you used to know. No one knew, or no one was willing to say." He paused for a beat. "You erased your tracks more cleanly than anyone I've ever known. And I've known a lot of people who were good at disappearing." Joanna listened to all of it. Her face didn't change, as if everything Reed had just said was something she had expected long ago. "I erased them because I wanted to disappear," she said slowly, every word clear. "You know why?" Reed looked at her. "Tell me." Joanna lowered her arms, not because she was less guarded, but because she was preparing to say the things she had kept inside herself for 10 years, and every word would weigh more than she imagined. "I know who you are, Reed." Her voice dropped lower. It wasn't cold anymore. Now it was something else. Tiredness, disappointment, and deep beneath it all, a pain that had already turned to scar tissue. "Not a restaurant owner, not a businessman. I know where your money comes from. I know who the people around you are. I know about the calls that came at midnight, the trips that were never explained, the men who came to see you with eyes that ordinary people don't have." She stopped and drew a shallow breath. "And I didn't want my child to grow up surrounded by those things." Reed stood still, completely still. Not because he had nothing to say, but because everything he had been prepared to say, every explanation, every argument, had just been stripped of meaning by one simple truth he couldn't deny. She hadn't left because she had stopped loving him. She had left because she was afraid of him, afraid of the man he was, afraid of the world he had chosen, and afraid that if she stayed, the child inside her would grow up and call that world normal. "You were pregnant when you left," Reed said. It wasn't a question. It was a realization that had just fallen into place inside his mind. Joanna didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She only looked at him, and that silence was the answer. Reed felt the floor tilt beneath him. Not much, but enough. He took half a step back. Not because he wanted to leave, but because his body reacted before his will could stop it. Tessa, the 9-year-old girl drawing portraits at the festival, the girl who signed her name with the Sparrow, the girl with eyes exactly like the woman standing in front of him. "She's my daughter," Reed said softly, hardly speaking to Joanna at all, but to himself. Joanna tightened her jaw. "She's my daughter," she answered. "I gave birth to her alone. I raised her alone. I taught her alone. You weren't there for any part of it, and that was my choice." Every sentence was short. Every sentence was final. Every sentence closed a door. Reed looked at her, and for the first time in a very long while, he couldn't find any answer at all. Not because he was wrong, but because she wasn't wrong. She had chosen to protect her child in the only way she knew how, by walking away from the man she loved most, because he was also the most dangerous man in her life. And Reed, standing in the middle of that bare apartment, with the painting of the 2 chairs on the wall and the Sparrow in the lower corner, understood that this wasn't a battle he could win with power, with money, or with promises. Because what Joanna feared wasn't what he did. It was him. The room fell silent after what Joanna had said, but it wasn't the silence of an ending. It was the silence that comes before everything breaks open further. Reed stood there, still unable to find any answer worthy of the truth Joanna had just placed before him. But he didn't leave. And that made Joanna angrier. "You think you have the right to come back?" Joanna said, her voice rising slightly. Not a shout, but the voice of someone who has forced herself to stay calm for too long and is beginning to lose her grip. 10 years, Reed. For 10 years I handled everything on my own. The rent, the medicine, food for me and my daughter. Teaching her to paint, keeping her believing that this life isn't as bad as it really is. And now you walk in here, in that expensive suit, looking around my apartment as if you pity me, and then you ask if I'm all right? Reed drew in a slow breath. "I didn't come here because of money." "Then what did you come for?" Joanna stepped forward 1 pace, her eyes bright with a light that wasn't hope, but anger. "Because of your conscience? Because after 10 years you suddenly remembered that a woman left you, and now you want to know why? Or because you just found out you have a daughter, and now that possessive instinct of yours is starting to—" She didn't finish the sentence. Her right hand went to her chest. Suddenly, as if someone had just driven a fist hard into her breastbone from the inside. Her face turned pale in an instant, the color draining from her skin the way water pulls back from the shore. Joanna swayed, her knees buckled, and her left hand reached for the side of the chair but slipped past it. Reed was there before she hit the floor. He caught her, one hand bracing her shoulder, the other supporting her back, pulling her against him with the reflex of a man accustomed to moving faster than thought. "Joanna." His voice was low, urgent, but not panicked. She didn't answer. Her eyes were shut tight, her breathing short, quick, shallow, the kind of breathing that belongs to someone trying to pull air in while her chest refuses to open enough to take it. One of her hands clutched the lapel of his suit jacket, her fingers tightening until the knuckles turned white. Not because she wanted to hold on to him, but because she could no longer hold on to herself. Reed looked around. Fast. On the shelf near the kitchen, above the sink, there was a small orange bottle of medicine, the kind of plastic bottle from a pharmacy, with a white cap, nearly empty. He reached for it, opened it with one hand, and shook out 1 pill. "Open your mouth," he said softly, placing the pill against her lips. Joanna didn't open her eyes, but she parted her mouth just enough. Swallowed. Reed held her, not moving, not saying anything more, only holding her, and waiting. Time passed so slowly that he could hear each beat of her heart through the fabric of her shirt. Fast, uneven, like a bird struggling inside her chest. Then it began to slow, gradually, 1 beat at a time. Her breathing grew longer, deeper. Her shoulders eased, her fingers on his lapel loosened, not releasing him completely, but no longer gripping tight. 1 minute, 2 minutes, maybe longer. Reed didn't count. Joanna opened her eyes, looked up at him. Her eyes were blurred, tired, but awake. She realized she was lying in his arms, realized her hand was still gripping his jacket, and the first thing she said, before trying to sit up, before fully catching her breath, was, "Don't tell Tessa." Not "thank you," not "I'm fine," Not anything about herself at all, but her daughter, the 9-year-old child at the neighbor's house, probably asleep by now, perhaps still holding the wool scarf she had just won, with no idea that a few streets away, her mother had just collapsed in the middle of an argument with a man she had only met tonight. "Don't tell Tessa," Joanna repeated, her voice weak but clear, as if that was the only thing that still mattered. Reed looked at her, looked at the nearly empty bottle of medicine on the shelf, looked at the apartment that, until a moment earlier, he had seen only as bare. And now he saw differently. He saw a woman who had lived for 10 years on the very edge of her limits, holding everything together with sheer will alone, and now that will was no longer enough. "I won't tell anyone," Reed answered, his voice low. Then he gently helped her sit back against the chair. Joanna let him do it, not because she accepted it, but because she no longer had the strength to refuse. Joanna drifted off in the chair not long after that. It wasn't normal sleep. It was the kind of sleep that comes when the body has been utterly drained, shutting itself down without waiting for permission from the will. Her head tilted to one side, one hand still resting over her chest, the other hanging loosely over the arm of the chair. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and beneath the thin skin of her wrist, Reed could still see the pulse, weak, but there. He sat across from her on the wooden chair beside the small dining table, both hands resting on his thighs, watching her. The apartment was so quiet that he could hear the old refrigerator humming in the corner of the kitchen, and the sound of water dripping from a faucet that had not been turned all the way off. Reed didn't sleep, not because he wasn't tired, but because the scene that had just happened kept replaying in his mind. The way she had collapsed, the way her fingers had clutched his jacket, the bottle of medicine nearly empty, and the first thing she had said when she woke hadn't been for herself, but for her daughter. He rose carefully and walked toward the sink to get a glass of water. The kitchen was small, only just wide enough for one person to turn around in. As he reached up to the shelf for a glass, his elbow brushed against a small drawer beside it, a drawer that wasn't fully closed, left pulled out a few inches. It was only a light touch, but it was enough. A stack of papers inside slid out and fell onto the kitchen floor. Reed looked down. Bills, not one or two. A thick stack, folded but not neatly, layered over one another, shoved into the drawer by someone who didn't want to see them but didn't dare throw them away. He bent and picked them up. The first page. Emergency room charges. 4 months earlier. A red stamp in the upper right corner, 2 words in capital letters. Past due. The second page. Blood work. 5 months earlier. Also past due. The third page. Echocardiogram. 6 months earlier. Past due. He kept turning the pages. Each one was another visit Joanna had made to the hospital, another examination, another prescription, another follow-up appointment scheduled, and then missed. Not because she hadn't wanted to return, but because at the bottom of every bill, the total was greater than anything a person living in this apartment could possibly afford. On top of the stack was a letter. No envelope. The paper was worn soft at the corners. The fold lines faded from being opened and closed too many times. A letter from the hospital, notifying her of a specialist cardiology follow-up. The appointment date was written clearly, 3 months earlier. Beneath it, a line in italics that Reed read twice. The patient is strongly advised to return for follow-up as scheduled. Delay in treatment may result in serious complications. Joanna knew. She knew she was seriously ill. She had known for a long time. She knew that every day that passed without treatment made her body weaker by another small degree. And she had chosen silence. Not because she was brave, but because she didn't have enough money. And between treating her illness or feeding her child, she had made her choice. Reed stood in the kitchen, the stack of bills in his hand, and for the first time that night, he didn't feel pain. He felt anger. Not at Joanna, at himself, at the 10 years. At the fact that he had enough money to buy the entire building, while the woman he had loved most was sleeping in that old chair with a bottle of medicine nearly empty and a stack of bills she could never pay. He set the glass of water down on the table, walked out into the hallway, closed the door softly behind him, took out his phone, called Pierce. The line rang twice. "Yes, sir." Pierce's voice was alert, even though it was now 2:17 in the morning. "Pay every bill I'm about to send you," Reed said, his voice even, offering no explanation. "Contact St. Mary Hospital and schedule the earliest cardiology follow-up possible. Tomorrow morning." Half a second of silence on the other end. not hesitation. Pierce was memorizing. Understood. Reed took pictures of every bill, one by one, sent them. Then he folded the stack of papers again, put it back into the drawer, and pushed the drawer back into its original place. Not to hide them, but because in the morning, when Joanna woke, she would find something else on the table. He went back into the apartment, sat down again in the old chair, watched Joanna sleep, and waited for morning. The first light of morning slipped through the thin curtain, falling in a long strip across the old wooden floor. Joanna opened her eyes. Slowly, blurred at first, then gradually clear. She was still lying in the chair, a thin blanket spread across her body, one she didn't remember anyone placing over her. Then she saw him. Reed was sitting in the chair across from her, in the exact same place where she had last seen him before drifting off. His suit jacket was off now, folded over the back of the chair. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up to his elbows. His eyes were open, alert, looking straight at her. He had not slept. Not all night. Joanna knew it at once. She tried to sit up, her body stiff from lying in the wrong position for so many hours. Then her eyes fell to the table, the stack of bills. She recognized them immediately because she had looked at those pages hundreds of times, had folded them, shoved them into the drawer, tried to forget them, but now they were lying on the table, arranged neatly, and on each one, in the upper right corner where the red stamp "Past Due" had been before, there was now a green stamp, 2 words printed clearly. Paid in full. Joanna looked at the stack of bills, then at Reed, then back at the stack of bills. Her face changed. Not relief, not gratitude. Anger. The kind of anger deeper than anything she had shown the night before, because last night she had been angry with him about the past, and now she was angry, because he had just stepped into the part of her life she had tried hardest to hide. You had no right to read those. Her voice was hoarse, weak after the night, but every word was clear. Reed didn't retreat. They fell out, he said, and I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen them. Joanna tightened her grip on the edge of the blanket across her lap. I don't need your money. The words came quickly, firmly, like a door being slammed shut. The last refusal. Joanna knew it was the last one, because she no longer had much strength left to refuse him again. Reed didn't argue. Instead, he reached into the stack and pulled out one sheet, the top one, the hospital letter, and set it apart beside the bills, directly in front of Joanna. You know you're seriously sick, he said, his voice neither rising nor falling, only steady, as if he were reading a sentence both of them had already known. You've known for a long time. You had a follow-up appointment and you didn't go. 3 months ago. Joanna looked at the letter. She didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. She knew every word in it. She had read it too many times, had folded it, opened it, folded it again, until the creases had gone pale and the paper had begun to wrinkle at the corners. She knew the line in italics at the bottom of the page. She knew how heavy the word's serious complications were, and she had chosen to push it into the drawer with the other bills, because between knowing something and having the money to do anything about what you know, there is a distance she had never been able to cross. I didn't have a choice, she said, her voice quieter now. Reed looked at her. Now you do. Joanna shook her head, slightly. Not denial, helplessness. You don't understand. Then help me understand, Reed said. Joanna looked at him, and in her eyes there was something that broke, not loudly, not dramatically, only a small crack in the shell she had built over 10 years. I don't want to owe you, she said. I don't want Tessa growing up knowing that her mother stayed alive because of money from a man like you. I don't want my daughter believing that your world is the price that has to be paid to stay alive. Reed listened, to every word. Then he spoke, slowly, not letting his voice grow heavier than hers. You have the right to hate me. You have the right not to want to see me. But Tessa needs you. You don't get to give up. Joanna didn't answer, didn't argue, didn't nod. She only sat there, looking at the bills that had been paid, looking at the hospital letter, looking at her own hands gripping the edge of the blanket. Then the tears fell, silently. No sobbing, no choking sound, no shaking shoulders, only tears, sliding down her cheeks, falling onto her hands, falling onto the thin blanket, quietly. Like something that had been held inside too long had finally overflowed, not because she allowed it, but because she could no longer hold it back. Reed said nothing. He didn't move closer. He didn't touch her. He only sat there, in the chair across from her, And for the first time in 10 years, he watched Joanna cry, and he understood that these were not the tears of someone weak. These were the tears of someone who had been strong for far too long. The tears stopped before Joanna gave them permission to. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, fast, decisive, like someone angry with herself for letting something show that should never have been seen. Then she sat straighter in the chair. Her shoulders stiffened, her jaw tightened, and Reed watched the wall go back up, quickly, familiarly, exactly the way Joanna always did it. Fall down, and then get back up, and pretend she had never fallen at all. You think paying a few bills changes everything? Her voice had steadied again. No tremor, no weakness. Cold, clear, and precise. I left because you were a danger. Because the world you live in is a danger. Because the people around you, the things you do, the money you make, all of it is a danger. Has that, she looked straight into his eyes, changed? That question wasn't meant for him to answer. It was a declaration. Joanna was telling him that no matter how many bills he paid, no matter if he sat here all night, no matter if he called the best doctors in the city, the heart of the problem remained the same. He was still who he was, and he himself was the reason she had left. Reed didn't answer at once. He looked at her, then down at his own hands. His fingers were laced together in his lap, calm on the outside, but tighter than she realized. The room was silent. The refrigerator still hummed in the corner of the kitchen. The morning light had grown stronger now, throwing everything into sharper relief. Every crack in the wall, every patch of peeling paint, every mark of a life that had tried with all its strength and still come up short. Then Reed spoke. Slowly, one word at a time. Not because he was choosing them carefully, but because for the first time, in a very long time, he was speaking the truth without any armor around it. No. One word. Joanna didn't move. I'm still that man, Reed went on. I've done things no one should do. I know what kind of world I live in. I know who the people around me are. And I know that world isn't a place for you, still less for Tessa. Joanna looked at him. She waited for the but. Because men like Reed always had a but. Always had a reason to justify themselves, to turn things, to make wrong look right through logic. She had already prepared herself to push back against that, but she had already prepared herself to say no again. Harder, more final. To end this conversation and push him out of the apartment, out of her life, forever. But do you know what is worse than a man like me? Reed said, and his voice now was different from anything she had heard from him the night before. No more restraint, no more control. No more of that calmness of a man used to keeping everything in his hands. His voice cracked. Only slightly. But enough. A man like me watching the woman he loves grow weaker by the day and turning away. He stopped. I can't do that. Joanna said nothing. The but she had been waiting for had come, but it wasn't the one she had prepared for. She had prepared for an excuse, for an empty promise, for something like, but I've changed, or, but I'll protect you. She had not prepared for Reed to look straight into her eyes and say that he knew he was not good, not try to make himself better in her eyes. Not try to paint over who he was, just stand there exactly as he was, and say that whatever he was, he could not walk away. The room stayed quiet, long enough for the morning light to move farther across the floor, long enough for Joanna to swallow down whatever was caught in her throat, long enough for her to realize that every wall she had built, every reason she had prepared, every refusal she had rehearsed in her mind for 10 years, none of them had been designed to defend against honesty, because Joanna could stand against power. She could stand against money. She could stand against promises, against control, against everything Reed represented. But she did not know how to stand against a man who looked at her and said, I know I don't deserve this, but I can't leave. Reed spoke again, his voice lower now. You don't have to forgive me. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness. He looked at her. You don't have to take me back. I'm not asking for that. Then he said the last thing, and this one carried more weight than all the rest. You just have to live. Tessa needs you to live. Joanna closed her eyes, not because she wanted to cry again. She had no tears left for that. But because she needed 1 second for that name, Tessa, to settle into the right place inside her chest, the place where all the most important decisions began. Tessa, the daughter she had delivered alone in a public hospital, the daughter she had taught to draw with cheap pencils on recycled paper, The daughter who sat at the festival drawing portraits of strangers to win a wool scarf for her mother's birthday. The 9-year-old child with eyes older than her years. If Joanna refused now, if she pushed Reed away one more time, if she chose pride over treatment, then the person who would bear the consequence would not be her. It would be Tessa. And Joanna could endure everything in this world. Everything. Except letting her daughter bear the cost in her place. She opened her eyes, looked at Reed, for a long time, not searching, not judging, only looking, like someone making a final decision without needing one more piece of information. "Only this once," she said. Her voice was quiet, tired, but clear. Reed nodded. "Only this once." Neither of them said anything more. They didn't need to, because both of them knew that only this once did not mean forgiveness. It did not mean going back. It did not mean everything would be all right. It meant only that today, this morning, in the small apartment on the south side with the morning light slipping through the thin curtains, Joanna chose not to refuse anymore. And for Reed, that was enough. Not everything, not yet, but enough to begin. Reed called Pierce just as full morning light settled over the city. The car arrived within 10 minutes. Joanna said nothing while she got ready. She went into the bathroom, washed her face, changed her shirt, and brushed her hair neatly back. Every movement was slow, careful with her strength, but deliberately composed, like someone who refused to walk into a hospital looking like a patient. When she came out, Reed was already standing by the door. He didn't hurry her. He didn't ask if she was ready. He only opened the door and stepped aside. Joanna walked past him, down the stairs, and outside. She didn't look back. The car was parked directly in front of the building. Pierce stood beside it, opening the rear door. His eyes passed over Joanna only once before turning away again, expressionless, curious about nothing, exactly the way a man learns to be when he knows not to ask what doesn't need asking. Joanna got into the back seat. Reed sat on the same side, but left enough space between them that neither of them tried to close it. Pierce drove away from the south side. The streets of Chicago in the early morning were quieter than they had been at night, but never truly still. A few cars passed in the opposite direction. Traffic lights blinked yellow at the intersections. The sun had climbed high enough to strike directly against the windows, and Pierce pulled down the sun visor without needing to be told. Joanna looked out through the glass. Her eyes followed the buildings slipping farther behind them, from the worn apartment blocks of the south side to wider, cleaner streets, where shop fronts were beginning to light up and pedestrians were appearing on the sidewalks with coffee cups in their hands. 2 worlds, separated by 10 minutes of driving. She said nothing. Reed said nothing either. Between them, there was only the sound of the engine and the distance of a handspan across the leather seat, but that distance carried more weight than 10 years. The car stopped in front of St. Mary Hospital, a private hospital, a building of glass and steel, spotless, quiet, the kind of place where patients are called by name instead of by number. Joanna looked at the building through the car window. She didn't get out right away. "I hate hospitals," she said. Her voice was light, not a complaint, only the truth. Reed opened the door on his side, stepped out, walked around to hers, and opened it. "I know," he said. Joanna looked at him. Then she looked at his hand holding the car door open. He didn't offer to help her down. He didn't reach for her. He only held the door, and waited. She stepped out. Her feet touched the sidewalk, and she knew at once that her knees were not as steady as she wanted them to be. Her first step wavered, only slightly, but enough for Reed to notice. He moved up beside her. He didn't take her hand. He didn't place a hand at her back. He only walked beside her, close enough that if she leaned, his shoulder would be the first thing she touched, far enough that she could still walk on her own. They passed through the automatic glass doors. Cool air from inside spilled over them, carrying the light scent of antiseptic and that particular silence hospitals have, the kind of silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from every sound being kept as low as possible. Joanna stepped inside. Her back was straight, her chin slightly raised, her steps trying to stay even. She was walking into the place she hated most in the world, and she would walk into it, holding herself upright. Reed walked beside her, silent, not leading, not following, only beside her. And in the small distance between his shoulder and hers, something was beginning to take shape. Not trust yet, not forgiveness, only presence. The two of them walked side by side farther inside, and the glass doors closed behind them, shutting the noise of the city outside. The hospital room was on the 4th floor, at the far end of the east corridor, quiet enough that Joanna could hear the sound of her own shoes against the tile when she walked in. One single bed, white sheets, white pillow, a small bedside table, a chair by the window, the curtains drawn open to let the morning light in, clean, orderly, and distant to the point of almost feeling indifferent. Joanna sat down on the edge of the bed, both hands resting on her lap, let her eyes move once around the room, then stopped looking. A nurse came in, attached an IV line to the back of her left hand, gentle and professional. Joanna didn't look at the needle going into her skin. She looked out the window. Reed stood near that window, back close to the wall, both hands in his trouser pockets, silent. He didn't sit down. He didn't come closer to the bed. He only stood there at the edge of the room, like a man accustomed to watching without interfering until it became necessary. The doctor came in about 20 minutes later. He pulled a chair over beside the bed, opened the file in his hands, and began to ask questions. When did the chest pain begin? A long time ago, Joanna said. How long is a long time? A few weeks? A few months? A few months. How many months? Joanna was silent for a beat. 6. Maybe 7. The doctor wrote it down. Have you been taking medication? Yes. Whenever I had it. What does whenever I had it mean? Joanna looked at him for the first time. It means whenever I could afford to buy it. The doctor's expression didn't change, but his pen paused on the paper for 1 second before he continued writing. He asked more about her history, about family history, about diet, about sleep. Joanna answered each question, short, exact, no more than what had been asked. The kind of answers given by someone who didn't want to be here but had promised she would stay. The doctor checked her blood pressure, listened to her heart and lungs, and ordered more blood work and an echocardiogram. Joanna let him do everything without protest, but without cooperation either. She sat there like someone enduring something, not like someone seeking treatment. Reed watched all of it from the corner of the room. He didn't cut in. He didn't answer for Joanna. He didn't prompt her to say more. He only listened and remembered. After about 45 minutes, the doctor stood up. He looked at Joanna. I'll come back when the results are in. Then he walked out. Reed followed him. The door to the room closed. Joanna lay back against the pillow, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, and for the first time that morning, she let out one long breath that was real. Out in the hallway, the doctor stopped a few steps from the door. He didn't soften it. Her condition is much worse than the old file showed, he said, his voice low, enough for only Reed to hear. The valve is severely damaged, the heart muscle is weakened, and going without consistent treatment for months has made everything significantly worse. Reed looked at him. What does she need? Surgery, the doctor said directly. A valve replacement. This is no longer a matter of medication and monitoring. If she doesn't have surgery, her heart won't hold out much longer. Reed's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. How long? I don't want to guess, the doctor said, but time is not on her side. Reed gave a slight nod. How soon can the surgery be done? 2 days. We need to stabilize a few more numbers before taking her into the operating room. But there's one condition. Reed waited. She has to agree to it. Reed looked at the closed hospital room door. Behind it was the woman who had refused him all night, refused help, refused the hospital, refused to admit that she was not all right, but also the woman who that morning had said only this once and gotten into the car. I'll talk to her, Reed said. The doctor nodded and walked away. Reed remained in the hallway a little longer. Not long, just long enough to arrange in his mind the way he would say what he was about to say. Because Joanna was not the kind of woman who could accept bad news wrapped in sugar. She needed the truth, bare, uncovered. He opened the door. Joanna didn't sit up. She lay there, eyes on the ceiling, but when he stepped inside, she spoke without turning her head. I saw your face already. Say it. Reed pulled the chair closer to the bed, sat down. Your heart needs surgery, he said. No softening, no sugarcoating. A valve replacement. The doctor said that if you don't have it, there isn't much time left. Joanna was silent. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ceiling, but her hand, the one without the IV line, tightened around the edge of the bedsheet. Is it necessary? She asked. There isn't another choice, Reed said. Joanna turned her head and looked at him. Her eyes held no anger, no fear, Only exhaustion. Exhaustion down to the bone. I need to think, she said. Reed looked at her. You have 2 days. Joanna didn't answer. She turned back to the ceiling, but her hand didn't release the bedsheet. And Reed understood that I need to think, coming from Joanna, wasn't the same as no, the way it had been before. It felt more like a person standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing she had to jump, but needing one more breath before taking the step. Joanna agreed to the surgery on the following afternoon. She didn't say all right or I agree. She only nodded when the doctor asked her one final time. A small nod, brief, like someone signing her name to something she did not entirely want but knew was necessary. The operation was scheduled for the morning after that. That night, the hospital sank into the kind of silence only a hospital has. Not true quiet, because machines still sounded, hallway lights still burned, nurses still moved back and forth, but everything existed at a lower frequency, as though the whole building were breathing in one shared rhythm, slow, steady, and unintentionally reminding everyone inside that time was still passing. Joanna lay in the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. She didn't sleep, not because of pain. The medicine had kept the pain at a distance, but because her mind would not stop. Reed sat in the chair by the window. His suit jacket had been off for a long time now, folded over the back of the chair. His shirt sleeves were rolled above his elbows. His tie had been removed, rolled up, and set beside the jacket. Under the dim light of the hospital room, he didn't look like the man in charge of anything. He looked like a 33-year-old man who was tired, who had not slept for 2 nights in a row, and who was sitting in a hospital because of the woman lying 3 steps away from him. You're not sleeping? Joanna asked without turning her head. No, Reed said. Silence. The heart monitor kept sounding in its steady rhythm. Then Joanna asked, her voice lighter now, as though this question had lived in her mind for a long time but had only found its way out tonight. 10 years. Did you ever look for someone else? Reed looked at her. She was still staring at the ceiling. No, he said. Joanna blinked. Why? Reed didn't answer at once. He looked out the window. Chicago at night. The lights still on. The city still awake. But from the 4th floor of a hospital, everything below looked farther away and smaller than it really was. Because I never finished looking for you, he said. Joanna didn't react right away. She lay still. Then she turned her face the other way, toward the white wall, and Reed didn't know what she was hiding on her face, but he didn't ask. There were things Joanna needed to keep for herself. He respected that. The silence stretched on. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Then Joanna spoke, her voice low and slow, like someone opening a door that had been locked for a very long time and whose hinges had grown rusty. I gave birth in a public hospital on the south side of the city, she said. Alone. No one was in the waiting room. No one called to ask how I was. A nurse asked me if I wanted to call anyone, and I said no, because there was no one to call. Reed sat still, listening. Tessa weighed 3.2 kilograms when she was born, Joanna went on. Small. The doctor said she needed a few more days of monitoring. I stayed in the hospital for 3 nights, watching her sleep in the incubator, and I thought that if this was the price of leaving you, then I would pay it. I would pay any price. She stopped, drew in a breath. Light, shallow, familiar. When she got older, I taught her to draw. Not because I wanted her to become an artist, but because I didn't have money to buy toys, and pencils and paper were the cheapest things I could give her. Then she really did love drawing. She was better at it than I expected. She drew everything. People walking by, stray cats in the alley, her teacher at school, and one day she asked me why I always painted the sparrow in the corner of every picture. I told her every artist needs a mark of her own, something that lets people know at a glance that the work belongs to her. Mine was the sparrow. She nodded, and from that day on, she signed her pictures with the sparrow too. Joanna turned her face back toward the ceiling. She doesn't know what that sparrow means. She only knows that her mother paints it, so she paints it too. But I know. Every time I see her sign that mark in the corner of a picture, I remember you, and I hate that. Reed said nothing, not because he had nothing to say, but because anything he could have said in that moment would have been smaller than what she had just shared. Joanna continued. On the nights when my chest hurt, I lay still. I didn't dare cough. I didn't dare turn over, because Tessa slept beside me, and if I moved too much, she would wake up. And if she woke up, she would ask questions. And if she asked questions, I would have to lie. and I have lied to her enough already." She closed her eyes, opened them again. "I told her that her father was a good man who had to go far away. I told her we were fine. I told her mother wasn't sick, only tired. Every lie was meant to protect her, but every one of them wore away another small piece of me." Silence. Long. Reed looked at her, and more clearly than ever before, he saw not the stubborn woman who had refused everything, but the woman who had stood alone in the middle of everything for 10 years, and was now too tired to hide it anymore. "You're braver than anyone I've ever known," he said. His voice was low, not praise. Truth. Joanna shook her head slightly against the pillow. "I'm not brave," she said. "I just didn't have any other choice." Reed leaned forward in the chair. "Now you do." Joanna looked at him. For a long time. In her eyes there was no anger now, no fear, no defense, only exhaustion. And deep beneath that exhaustion, something she had tried to bury for 10 years, but that was still there, whole and persistent, like the sparrow in the corner of a painting. She said nothing more, turned her head back toward the ceiling, closed her eyes, and this time she truly slept. Reed sat in the chair by the window, watching her sleep, watching her breathing settle into an even rhythm, watching her hand, the one without the IV line, relax against the white sheet, and he remembered that 10 years earlier, that hand had held his every night before sleep. He didn't hold her hand tonight, but he didn't leave either. And sometimes, staying is the only way to say all the things words can't reach. The next morning, Reed stepped out into the hallway while Joanna was still asleep. He called Pierce. "The surgery is confirmed for tomorrow morning. Arrange everything. The lead surgeon, the recovery room afterward. Everything has to be ready before 8 o'clock. Pierce confirmed. Reed ended the call. He stood there in the middle of the hallway, his back against the wall, and closed his eyes for 1 second. 2 nights without sleep were beginning to settle onto his shoulders. Not physically. He was used to nights longer than that, but mentally. Everything from the night before, Joanna's voice telling him about the past 10 years, about Tessa, about those nights she had lain still and not dared to cough, was still sitting in his mind, like something he could not push away even if he wanted to. Then he opened his eyes and saw the man. At the far end of the hallway, about 15 steps away, a man stood leaning against the wall. His hands were in the pockets of his coat. His posture was easy, like a man waiting for someone, but his eyes were anything but easy. Those eyes were looking straight at Reed. Victor Slade. Reed recognized him instantly, without needing to think. That name belonged to the part of his past he never mentioned in ordinary conversations, but never forgot either. Victor and Reed had once stood on the same side for years. Then they no longer had. The reason no longer mattered. What mattered was that Victor knew exactly who Reed was, knew how Reed's empire worked, and knew that when Reed suddenly used his private resources, paid the hospital bills of an unknown woman, arranged her admission to a private hospital overnight, word of that would spread fast through their world. Because in that world, any shift in the behavior of the man at the top was a signal, and signals were always read by someone. Victor did not move. He only stood there. When Reed started walking toward him, Victor gave a faint smile, the kind of smile that would look friendly to an outsider, but Reed knew exactly what it meant. "Ashford," Victor said, his voice casual, like greeting an old friend. "Long time. I hear you've been busy taking care of someone." Reed did not react. His face did not change. His stride did not slow or quicken. He stopped 3 steps away from Victor. "People are talking a lot these days," Victor went on, his eyes flicking lightly toward the hospital room door at the far end of the hall where Joanna lay. "A man like you, dropping everything, sitting in a hospital over some girl from the South Side. People are starting to wonder whether you're getting distracted." Reed looked at Victor. Without blinking, without tightening his jaw, without raising his voice, he took his phone from his trouser pocket, pressed a number, lifted it to his ear. The call was answered after 1 ring. Reed spoke. 3 sentences. His voice even. Low, slow. Not one of them was a question. All 3 were orders. He ended the call, slipped the phone back into his pocket, then looked at Victor. "You have 30 seconds. 4 words. Not loud, not soft. No need for anything more, because Victor understood exactly what 30 seconds from Reed Ashford meant. It was not an invitation to leave. It was a deadline. The smile disappeared from Victor's face. Not because of fear. Victor was not the kind of man who frightened easily, but because he had just realized that call had not been to Pierce. It had gone to someone else. Someone whose response would reach Victor before he could leave the building if he did not go now. Victor looked at Reed. Reed looked back. There was nothing between them but silence. Then Victor took his hands out of his coat pockets, gave a slight nod, turned, and walked away down the hallway. He did not look back. His steps were even, not rushed, but not slow either. Reed stood there until Victor's figure disappeared completely around the stairwell corner. Then he drew in one long breath, the first since seeing him, and let it out slowly. He turned back toward the hospital room, stepped inside. Joanna was awake. She was sitting propped against the pillows, holding the glass of water the nurse had left on the bedside table. When Reed walked in, she looked at him, and she knew at once. Not because he said anything. He said nothing at all. But because his body was different. The way he stood was tighter. His jaw was set harder than usual. His eyes were still calm, but behind that calm there was something that had just been compressed, folded away, put aside, but had not cooled. Joanna had lived close enough to that world to recognize it. She needed no one to explain it. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing," Reed said, his voice even, his face unchanged. Joanna set the glass of water back on the bedside table, looked at him, longer this time. Not suspicious. She already knew the real answer. She only wanted to see whether he would say it. He did not, and that confirmed everything. "You still live in that world," she said. Not a question, a statement. Reed looked at her. He did not deny it. He did not explain. He did not promise to change. He only said 4 words. "But I'm here now." Joanna looked at him, and in that moment, she saw it more clearly than ever before. The strength she had once feared, the power she had run from for 10 years, had just been used to protect her. She did not know the details. She did not need to, but she knew that someone had just come too close to her hospital room, and Reed had pushed that person away before she ever had the chance to know. She did not say thank you. She did not nod. She only looked at him for 1 second longer, then turned back to the glass of water on the table. But in that one look, something between them had shifted. Not much, but enough. The next morning came faster than Reed wanted it to. Barely had the light begun to slip through the curtains before the nurses came in to prepare her. They checked the IV line, took her blood pressure one last time, handed Joanna the consent form for surgery. Joanna signed it. Her hand did not tremble. Her handwriting was clear and steady, like someone who had already made the decision and would not allow her body to betray it. They moved her onto a rolling bed. Joanna lay there with the white sheet pulled to her chest, her hair gathered neatly back. When the bed began to move toward the door, she turned her head and looked at Reed. He was standing by the window, in the same place he had stood for the past 2 days, as though it were the only place in that room that belonged to him. "Reed." He came to her, quickly, then stopped beside the bed. Joanna looked at him. There was no fear in her eyes, no sadness, only clarity, awareness, like someone saying the most important thing she had to say and knowing she might have only one chance to say it. "If I don't make it out," she said, her voice even and soft, "tell Tessa that that wool scarf was the most beautiful gift I ever received." Reed looked at her, straight into her eyes, without blinking. "You'll tell her yourself," he said. Joanna looked at him for 1 second more. Then she turned her face back toward the ceiling. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She only turned away. The bed was pushed out into the hallway. Reed walked beside it, keeping pace, until it stopped in front of the double doors to the surgical wing. A nurse looked at him. "Only the patient can go beyond this point, sir." Reed stopped, looked at Joanna one last time. She did not look back. Her eyes were already closed. The doors opened. The bed was wheeled through. The doors closed. And Reed stood there, alone, in the middle of the white hallway. The sound of the doors shutting still lingered faintly in the air, then died. Silence. The kind of silence no phone call can fill. He stood there a few more seconds, staring at the closed doors, then turned away. Walked down the hall, found a chair, sat down, leaned his back against the wall, rested both hands on his thighs, and waited. Reed Ashford had spent his life accustomed to control. All his life. Every problem had a solution. If he had enough money, enough men, enough power, one phone call could move mountains. One order could change the whole board. But here, on a hard plastic chair in the middle of a hospital corridor, he could call no one. He could order no one. He could not buy the outcome he wanted. Joanna's heart was lying on an operating table, and he, a man who held an empire in his hands, could do nothing but sit here and wait. He did not look at his watch. He did not take out his phone. He did not stand and pace. He only sat there, his eyes fixed on the closed double doors at the far end of the hall. And for the first time in his life, Reed Ashford understood that power meant nothing at all. 3 hours. 3 hours and 14 minutes, to be exact. But Reed did not count. He only sat there and waited. And at some point in the middle of that waiting, he realized that he was praying. Not in words, not through religion. It was only that something inside him kept repeating a single sentence, over and over, and he did not even realize he was thinking it until it had already repeated too many times. She has to be all right. She has to be all right. She has to be all right. The double doors opened. The doctor stepped out, still in surgical scrubs, his surgical cap pulled down around his neck, his face calm now, no longer drawn the way it had been before. He looked down the hallway, saw Reed, and walked toward him. Reed stood up. He did not remember standing. His legs had done it before his mind had time to give the order. The surgery was successful, the doctor said. The valve has been replaced. Her body responded well. She needs rest and monitoring, but she is going to be all right. Reed let out a breath. Not the dramatic kind. Not the kind where a man puts a hand over his chest and closes his eyes the way they do in films. Just one long, slow breath leaving his body, carrying with it something he had been holding inside for the past 3 hours, without realizing he had been holding it at all. He nodded to the doctor. Thank you. 2 words. But the way he said them, soft and low, with the voice of a man who had just been given back something he thought he had lost, made the doctor nod once in return and walk away without saying anything more. Reed remained in the hallway a moment longer. Not long, only long enough for his breathing to settle back into something normal. Then he took out his phone, called Pierce. Pick Tessa up from Mrs. Miller's place. Bring her to St. Mary Hospital, 4th floor. Pierce did not ask why. How soon do you need her here? As soon as possible. But don't rush. Let her finish breakfast first. Understood. Reed ended the call, looked at the double doors one more time, then sat back down in the chair. Waited again. This time, the waiting felt lighter. 40 minutes later, a nurse came out and said Joanna had been moved to recovery. Reed went in. The room was smaller than the one she had stayed in before, quieter too. Joanna lay on the bed with her eyes closed, her breathing even. Around her, the soft beeping of the monitor rose and fell in a steady, stable rhythm. Reed pulled the chair closer to the bed, sat down, and waited. This time, not for long. Joanna opened her eyes, slowly, blurred. She blinked a few times. Then her pupils focused, and she saw him. Reed leaned forward. You're still here, he said softly. Joanna looked at him. Her eyes were clouded by the anesthesia that had not fully worn off yet, but somewhere behind that haze, she was still herself. Her voice was hoarse, weak, no more than a little above a whisper, but every word still carried that same sharp edge that belonged only to Joanna. I can't exactly go anywhere. I'm in a hospital bed. Reed looked at her, and for the first time in 4 days, since the moment he had stopped in the middle of the festival and seen the sparrow in the corner of that painting, he almost smiled. Not quite a full smile, only the slightest movement at the corner of his mouth, so small that anyone else would have missed it, but Joanna noticed. She noticed because she knew that face. She had not seen it in 10 years, but she still knew it. You just had heart surgery and you still have enough strength left to take a shot at me, he said. Joanna closed her eyes again. They operated on my heart, not my mouth. And this time, Reed really smiled. Small, brief, but real. Joanna did not see it because her eyes were already closed. But if she had opened them then, she would have seen something very few people in the world had ever seen on Reed Ashford's face. Relief. Not relief because he had regained control of the situation. Relief because the person he cared about most was still here, still sharp-tongued, still stubborn, still Joanna. He settled back into the chair, watched her sleep, and this time, he let himself breathe, truly breathe, because somewhere out there, Pierce was already on his way to pick up Tessa, and when the little girl arrived, this room would change. Everything would change. Reed heard her footsteps before he saw her. Small, quick footsteps running down the hallway, the sound of canvas shoes striking the hospital floor, creating the kind of sound this place almost never held. The sound of hurry, not born of fear, but of eagerness. He rose from the chair and stepped out of the room, and saw Tessa. She was running down the hallway, the cream-colored wool scarf folded neatly in her hand, her small box of drawing supplies slung across her shoulder, her hair a little messy from running, her eyes bright, fixed on him. Pierce walked behind her, a few steps back, his stride even, his face still unreadable, but there was something in the way he watched the little girl, almost gentle, though he would never have admitted it. Tessa stopped in front of Reed, breathing hard, looking up at him. "My mother is here?" she asked. Reed nodded. "Your mother is in the room. She's all right now." Tessa looked at him for one more second, as if she needed to confirm that all right here truly meant all right. Then she turned toward the hospital room door and pushed it open. Joanna was lying in the bed, her head tilted slightly to one side, her eyes closed. She had fallen asleep again after speaking with Reed, the light sleep of someone who had just come through surgery, the kind of sleep that any small sound could break, and Tessa's voice broke it. "Mom!" One word, but the way Tessa said it, joyful and soft at once, loud enough for her mother to hear but not too loud because the little girl knew this was a hospital, made Joanna open her eyes immediately. And when Joanna saw her daughter standing at the foot of the bed, holding the wool scarf, eyes bright, hair untidy, still wearing the coat she had worn to the festival, everything on her face changed. Gone. The exhaustion, the pain, every wall, all of it gone. There was only a mother seeing her child. Joanna opened her arms. Her left arm still had the IV line attached, so she lifted it carefully, but she still opened both arms wide, though her body objected, though the incision in her chest pulled tight, though every movement cost her something. She still opened her arms because no pain in the world was greater than the distance between her and her daughter in that moment. Tessa ran to her, but when she reached the side of the bed, she slowed down, gently. She hugged her mother, but not too tightly. Her small arms circled Joanna's neck, holding her just firmly enough, like she was embracing something precious she was afraid of breaking. Joanna closed her eyes. One hand held Tessa's back, the other rested on her daughter's head, stroking her hair softly. She said nothing. She only held her, and breathed. And in that moment, everything Joanna had carried for 10 years, every night she had lain still and not dared to cough, every bill she had shoved into the drawer, every lie she had told to keep her daughter from worrying, all of it became worth it. Because her little girl was here, and she was still here to hold her. Tessa let go first. She stepped back one pace, both hands still resting on the edge of the blanket, looked her mother up and down, and then smiled. A wide, bright smile, unguarded, unwatched. Not the smile of a child used to measuring every situation before reacting, just a smile, simple. The smile of a 9-year-old girl who had just seen her mother. "I won the contest, Mom," Tessa said, her voice full of excitement. "I brought this for you." She unfolded the wool scarf, carefully, one fold at a time. Then she rose onto her toes and draped it around Joanna's shoulders, gently, adjusting both ends until they hung evenly, then stepped back to admire it. Joanna looked down at the scarf resting on her shoulders. Her hand touched the wool. Her fingers moved across the threads slowly, as if reading something woven inside them. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Tessa nodded, satisfied. "Cream-colored. It looks good on you." Joanna looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, the first true smile Reed had seen on her face since finding her again. Not a faint smile, not a smile given out of politeness, a real smile, because her daughter had just wrapped a wool scarf around her shoulders, a scarf won at the festival drawing contest, and that alone was enough to make Joanna forget that she was lying in a hospital bed with a fresh incision in her chest. Reed was not in the room. He stood outside the glass door, his back lightly against the hallway wall, both hands in his trouser pockets. Looking in through the glass, he watched Tessa place the scarf around her mother's shoulders, watched Joanna touch the wool, watched the two of them smile at each other, and he did not go in, not because anyone had told him to stay outside, not because he felt awkward, but because that moment, the moment Tessa draped the scarf over her mother's shoulders and Joanna smiled, did not belong to him. It belonged to them, the two of them, mother and daughter. 10 years of only the two of them, and he had no right to step into the middle of that. Tessa said something Reed could not hear clearly through the glass. Joanna nodded and smiled again. Then Tessa turned around. Her eyes moved to the glass door, and saw him. Reed did not move. He did not wave. He did not gesture. He only stood there. Tessa looked at him. Then she walked toward the door, opened it, stepped out into the hallway, stopped in front of him. The little girl said nothing. She did not ask why he was standing outside. She did not invite him in with words. She only reached out her hand, took hold of his. Her hand was small and warm, wrapping around only 3 of his fingers because her hand was not big enough to hold the entire hand of the most powerful crime boss in Chicago. And she pulled, gently, but firmly. Reed looked down at the small hand holding his. Then he looked at Tessa. She was not smiling. She said nothing. She only pulled, as though this were the most natural thing in the world, as though him standing outside was the only foolish thing she had seen all day. Reed let her lead him. He stepped through the door, into the room. Joanna looked up, saw Tessa leading Reed in, her hand still wrapped around his. Joanna's eyes stopped at Tessa's hand holding Reed's. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then she lifted her gaze to his face, and in her eyes, for the first time since he had stepped into that apartment on the south side, there was no anger, no fear, no defense, only one thing, the thing Joanna had tried to keep hidden all this time, and her daughter had just pulled it into the light with the simplest act in the world. She let him stay here, not because she had forgiven him, but because her daughter had chosen him. Tessa sat on the edge of the bed, her legs swinging lightly, her box of drawing supplies open beside her thigh. She pulled out a pencil and took the blank sheet of paper the nurse had left on the bedside table, the thin kind used for writing medical notes, but in Tessa's hands it became something else. She began to draw. Without saying a word, she only lowered her head, her eyes focused, her hand moving gently across the paper. Joanna lay beside her, turning her head slightly to watch her daughter draw. The wool scarf still rested on her shoulders, both ends falling down over her chest, warm and light. She did not ask what her daughter was drawing. She already knew, because Tessa always drew the same person when she wanted to give a gift and had nothing else to give. Reed stood beside the bed, 1 step away from the 2 of them. He watched Tessa draw, watched the way she tilted the pencil, pulled the lines from left to right, slower along the curves of the face, quicker through the hair. That style, that stroke, that habit. He had seen it at the festival, had recognized it in the painting on the wall of the apartment, and now he was seeing it again, on a hospital sheet of paper, beneath the hand of a 9-year-old girl drawing a portrait of her mother. Joanna looked over at Reed. He realized she was looking at him, but he did not turn right away. He let her look first, because sometimes a person needs to look at someone when that person does not know they are being watched, in order to see what they truly are. And what Joanna saw in that moment was a man standing there watching her daughter draw, with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not the look of a man in control, not the look of a man calculating. It was the look of a man seeing something he never knew he had, until it stood right in front of him. Reed turned then. His eyes met hers. Joanna did not look away this time. She looked at him, for a long time, in silence. The hospital room was quiet. There was only the sound of pencil on paper, and the steady rhythm of the heart monitor behind them. Then Joanna spoke. "I don't forgive you." Her voice was soft, not angry, not cold, only true. Like a truth she needed to say not to hurt him, but because she would not lie anymore. Not to him, not to herself. Reed did not react. He did not nod. He did not look down. He did not swallow. He only stood there and waited, because he knew Joanna was not finished. Joanna drew in a breath, light and shallow, the incision in her chest still reminding her that a deep breath was a luxury. Then she spoke again. "But I'm letting you stay here." Reed looked at her. She looked back, and between them, across 1 step in 10 years, something lowered. Not a wall collapsing. The wall was still there, but a door had just opened in it. Small, narrow, just wide enough for one person to pass through if he lowered his head enough. "That's enough," Reed said. Joanna did not nod. She did not smile, but she did not look away. And to Reed, that carried more weight than any forgiveness ever could. "Mom," Tessa lifted her head and held the drawing up in both hands in front of Joanna, level with her eyes. A portrait of Joanna, smiling. The smile Tessa had just seen when she wrapped the scarf around her mother's shoulders. The smile she had managed to memorize and place on paper before it could disappear. And in the lower right corner of the portrait, small and simple, made with only a few pencil lines, was the sparrow. Joanna looked at the drawing, looked at her own smile on the paper, looked at the sparrow in the corner, then looked at her daughter. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered. Tessa smiled. Reed looked at the drawing, looked at the sparrow in the corner, the sparrow Joanna had signed in the corner of every painting 10 years earlier. The sparrow Tessa had inherited, without knowing what it carried with it. The sparrow that evening in the middle of the autumn festival, had made his feet stop before his mind had understood why. And this time, Reed smiled. This story reminds us that true strength does not lie in what you control. It lies in what you choose to protect. If this story touched you, please press the like button so that more people can hear it. Share this video with someone you love or someone who needs a warm story today. And if you have not subscribed to our channel yet, please subscribe now so you don't miss the best stories every day. We would truly love to know how this story made you feel. So please leave a comment below and share with us the emotions that rose from the deepest part of your heart. We read every single comment and treasure every word you share. Thank you for taking the time to listen. We wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace and happiness each day. Goodbye, and we will see you again in the next video. This story is a work of fiction, created for entertainment purposes. All characters, events, and situations in the story are not real and do not represent any real person or event.